He walked onto the talk show set holding a small beige envelope. Inside were a stranger's ashes. Keanu Reeves wasn't there to promote a movie. He was there to keep a promise. But when he opened the letter she left behind, what he read silenced the entire room and changed him forever. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The stage lights were dimmer than usual that night, not by design, but because something unspoken hung in the air. The usual chatter in the audience before a taping had been replaced with a subtle, curious hush. Even the crew, typically efficient and casual, moved with a certain reverence. It wasn't just another episode. No one quite knew why, but they felt it in their bones. Then Keanu Reeves walked in. He didn't stride in the way most celebrities did, flashing smiles, waving to fans, joking with the host. He stepped onto the stage slowly, carefully, like someone entering a sacred space. In his left hand, he held a small beige envelope. It was creased, slightly worn like it had passed through time, the kind of envelope that had seen things, the kind you didn't throw away. The host welcomed him with a warm smile and a few light words, but even he could sense something different. Keanu returned the smile with a quiet nod and sat down gently, placing the envelope on his lap. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was intentional, filled with something no one had a name for yet. Then, with a breath that carried more than air, Keanu looked down at the envelope. "I wasn't sure if I should bring this," he said softly. The host tilted his head. "Something personal?" Keanu nodded, but didn't look up. His fingers brushed the edge of the envelope like it might vanish if he wasn't careful. "It was sent to me a few weeks ago, by a mother named Marlene." The audience leaned in, silently. Every eye focused. Every sound fell away. "Her daughter, Sarah," Keanu continued, "passed away from cancer last month. She was only 23. The words hung in the air like smoke. Slow, heavy, impossible to ignore. "She was a fan," Keanu added, then paused. "But more than that, she wrote me letters for years. I read them all. I never wrote back." The host stayed quiet, allowing the moment to breathe. Keanu's voice didn't shake, but his hands gripped the envelope a little tighter. "In her final days," he said, "Sarah asked her mom to send me something, not for attention, not for tribute. She said she didn't want flowers. She didn't want memorials or posts or speeches. She just wanted to be close." Keanu slowly began opening the envelope. "I wasn't sure what I would find," he murmured, "and honestly, I still don't know if I deserve to hold it." The flap opened with a soft rustle, and Keanu reached inside. He pulled out a small velvet pouch, dark red, delicate, like it had been handled with care every step of the way. There wasn't a sound in the studio. Not a cough, not a whisper. Just the weight of the moment pressing gently on everyone's chest. And then Keanu reached into the pouch. His fingers moved with extraordinary care, as if the contents could shatter under the wrong kind of touch. From within the velvet pouch, Keanu drew out a silver chain, delicate and gleaming faintly under the studio lights. At the center hung a small heart-shaped locket. It was simple, no embellishments, just smooth silver, worn at the edges. It looked like something that had been held often, maybe kissed, maybe clutched in the middle of the night when sleep was far away. Keanu held the locket in his open palm. He stared at it for a long time. His breath grew steadier, but his jaw tightened, as if holding back something larger than sorrow. "There's a small amount of Sarah's ashes inside," he said at last, his voice nearly a whisper. A collective silence followed, deeper than the one before. No one moved. No one dared. "She didn't want anything extravagant," he continued. "She didn't want a movie credit or a viral story. She just asked to be close to someone who made her feel seen." He paused and looked directly into the audience for the first time. I don't think I ever understood what that meant. Not really. Not until I held this. The silver locket dangled slightly from the chain as Keanu raised it closer to his chest. He didn't put it on. He didn't have to. Just holding it felt like ceremony enough. The host remained still, sensing this wasn't the time for a clever transition or a follow-up question. The usual rhythm of interviews had been broken. What was unfolding now wasn't entertainment. It was grief, pure and private, unfolding in public. Keanu looked down at the locket again. "I used to think silence was just empty space," he said. "But this silence is full." He leaned back in the chair, eyes never leaving the locket. I can't explain the feeling of receiving someone's ashes in the mail. It's not something you prepare for. When I first opened the pouch, I froze. I just stared at it. For hours. It didn't feel like an object. It felt like a presence. He looked at the host again, but this time his gaze went through him, past the cameras, reaching into something beyond the room. Sheen said, "I made her feel less invisible. That in her hardest days, knowing I existed gave her hope." He swallowed hard. "I didn't know her, I never met her, but she knew me. Somehow, she knew something about me I didn't even see in myself." Keanu's voice softened, trembling but controlled. "That's what this locket is," he said. "It's not just about ashes, it's not about death. It's about being remembered." He closed his hand gently around the locket and rested it on his knee. "And she asked me to carry her, so now I do." The audience remained frozen in their seats, as if even the smallest sound might disrupt what had settled over the room. It was no longer a talk show, no longer a stage. It felt like something sacred had taken hold, an invisible line drawn between one man's open heart and the quiet grief of a stranger. Keanu placed the locket on the table between them. His fingers lingered on the chain, tracing it with a reverence usually reserved for relics or memories that hurt too much to say aloud. "Written in one of her earlier letters," he said slowly, "that she didn't want to die afraid. She didn't want to be forgotten. She said, 'If I can't leave a mark, maybe I can leave something small behind, something that matters to someone who mattered to me.'" He looked up again, and his eyes met the host's with a steadiness that came not from confidence, but from surrender. "I think we underestimate what it means to be seen," Keanu said. "To be noticed, not for what you do, but for who you are when you think no one's watching." The host nodded, his expression soft, eyes glossy with unshed tears. He didn't interrupt. There were no commercial breaks coming, no transitions to scripted humor. Only this. Keanu sat back in the chair, his voice quieter now. "She didn't ask me to say anything tonight. This wasn't for the world, it was for me. But I realized that staying silent, keeping it to myself, that would make her invisible all over again." He took a deep breath, long and slow. "I didn't come here to promote anything. I didn't come here with a message. I came because I owed her something more than silence." His gaze swept across the room. Soft lights, expectant faces, the glow of the cameras that suddenly felt less like an audience and more like witnesses. "I've held a lot of things in my life," he continued. "Trophies, scripts, weapons on set, hands I've loved. But I've never held something like this. A piece of someone who trusted me with their final wish." He paused, then added in a voice that barely carried, "And I still don't know why she chose me." The locket caught the light once more, a faint glimmer, as he gently lifted it off the table and cradled it in both hands. "But I do know this," Keanu said. "She gave me something I can never repay. A reminder. That presence is the greatest gift we give each other, that to be remembered is, in some ways, to never truly be gone." He leaned forward slightly, locket in hand. "And so, I remember her." The room remained still. It wasn't applause they needed. It was silence, the kind that holds meaning, the kind that says, "We hear you." We see her too. And in that silence, something began. Something that would ripple far beyond the walls of that quiet studio. Keanu kept his gaze on the silver locket as if afraid it might vanish if he looked away. The weight of it wasn't just in the chain or the metal or the ashes it carried. It was something deeper, something that pressed into his chest like an invisible hand reminding him of everything he'd never said. "She started writing to me 5 years ago," he said quietly. "Just after my birthday, actually." The host didn't speak. He only nodded, his eyes steady. The first letter came to my team's office. It was handwritten, no return address, just her first name, Sarah. She didn't ask for anything. She just shared pieces of her life, how she was going through treatment, how she watched my interviews when she couldn't sleep, how, for reasons I didn't understand at the time, I helped her feel less alone. Keanu paused. His voice was still calm, but his hands tightened slightly around the locket. He wrote every few months, always kind, always hopeful. She told me about her cat, Theo, her favorite books, her mom's terrible spaghetti recipe that she loved anyway. It wasn't fan mail. It was friendship, one-sided maybe, but honest. He exhaled, shaking his head gently. I read every one. The room remained silent. I never wrote back, Keanu admitted. I told myself I didn't know what to say, that I was just an actor, that she'd be better off talking to someone who could really help. He looked up at the ceiling briefly before continuing. But the truth is, I didn't think I mattered that much. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, locket still resting in his palm. She saw something in me I couldn't see in myself. And when this arrived, he motioned to the envelope and pouch. I realized I hadn't just been reading her letters. I'd been receiving her trust. There was a pause, the kind that asked the audience to lean closer without moving at all. She told her mother, he said slowly, that she didn't want flowers or tributes. She just wanted to stay near someone who made her feel seen. Keanu reached into the envelope again and pulled out a folded slip of paper, soft with age and use. It came with the locket, he said, a note she wrote in her final week. He unfolded it carefully, treating the fragile paper with the same reverence he'd shown the locket. She wrote, "You made me feel seen in a world that looked away." His voice caught slightly at the end of the sentence. I don't think there's anything more powerful someone can say to another human being. He looked out over the audience, eyes heavy but clear. And I've spent years trying not to be seen. Now I wonder how many people I've missed while I was hiding. Keanu folded the slip of paper slowly and returned it to the envelope. His hands moved with a kind of care that spoke louder than his words. He rested the envelope gently on the table beside him, next to the velvet pouch, and leaned back in his chair. "When I first opened the package," he said, voice low, "I didn't touch it right away. I just sat there, staring, for hours. I kept asking myself, why me?" He looked up again, not at the cameras or the host, but at the space above the audience, like he was still searching for an answer that hadn't arrived. It felt sacred, not because it was delicate or fragile, but because it was chosen. She chose me. Out of everyone, she chose me. He paused. His fingers lightly touched the chain again, letting it dangle just enough to catch the studio light. And that scared me. The host nodded softly. Still, he didn't interrupt. "I've held a lot of things over the years," Keanu continued. "Props, awards, guns for movie roles, even the hands of people I've loved and lost. But nothing like this. This is someone's last breath, someone's last hope, someone's story reduced to a few grains of ash." He swallowed hard, and I didn't know how to carry that. The audience was frozen. Not in shock, but in quiet solidarity. Everyone knew grief. Everyone knew silence. But not everyone had heard it spoken aloud with such honesty. Keanu looked down at the locket again. "I thought about sending it back," he admitted. "Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't think I deserved it." His voice softened. But then I remembered her letters. I remembered the way she described things, the sound of her cat purring against her hospital pillow, the way sunlight came through her bedroom curtains in the late afternoon, the joy she got from rereading To Kill a Mockingbird every spring. He smiled faintly, just for a moment. Few found beauty in the middle of pain. Not after it, not in spite of it. Right in the middle of it. He let that linger. And somehow, in that quiet way, she invited me into her world. He took a breath, steadier now. I've spent a lot of my life trying not to be a burden. I never wanted to be the reason someone felt more pain. But Sarah? She wasn't asking for anything. She was offering something. Connection, memory, grace. He leaned back again, holding the locket gently between his fingers. And that's why I brought it here tonight. Not for attention, not for show, but because it's time I stopped pretending that I wasn't changed by her. He looked up, this time into the lens. And because I think someone out there might need to hear what she gave me. Keanu let the silence breathe for a moment longer before continuing. The locket now rested lightly in his palm, its chain curled like a memory across his fingers. She didn't write long letters, he said quietly. They weren't filled with questions or expectations. Just stories, observations, things she thought I might understand. His thumb brushed the smooth surface of the locket. I think she knew, he added. Somewhere inside she knew I wasn't just reading, I was listening. He looked out into the crowd, not searching for a face, but offering something back, something quiet and unspoken. The way people sometimes look into a window at night and catch their own reflection looking back. In her final letter, he said, she wrote something that stayed with me every day since I opened it. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded page, edges softened by time and the oil from his hands. He didn't open it yet, he just held it, pressed between his fingers. She said, if this locket ever makes it to you, don't wear it out of obligation. Don't carry it for me. Carry it for you. Because somewhere along the way we stopped believing that we matter to people we've never met. But we do. You matter to me. Keanu's voice was calm, but it cracked slightly at the end. Not from weakness, but from the effort it took to say something that had lived quietly inside his chest for too long. I didn't answer her letters, he said. Not once. And for a long time, I thought that made me a coward. He paused. But now I think maybe it just made me human. The host blinked, his hands folded tightly in his lap. He hadn't spoken in nearly 10 minutes. The entire room still held its breath. Keanu looked down at the locket again. There's something about holding part of someone who trusted you with their goodbye, he said. It humbles you. It changes you. It reminds you that sometimes we matter more in silence than we ever will in noise. He gently placed the locket against his chest, not fastening it, not wearing it fully, just holding it there, close enough to feel its shape through his shirt. She didn't ask to be famous, he said. She didn't ask for her name to be remembered. She asked to be felt. And somehow, through all the noise in the world, her quiet reached me. He looked into the camera one more time. If you've ever wondered whether a single act of kindness matters, or if your presence, just your being, can change someone, I'm here to tell you it can. His voice fell to a whisper. He changed me. The room stayed silent, and in that silence, there was a shift, an understanding. A single silver locket, a young woman's final gift, had cracked something open. And Keanu Reeves was no longer holding ashes. He was holding grace. Keanu held the folded letter with both hands. His thumbs hovered over the crease like he wasn't sure if he should open it again. It wasn't fear that made him hesitate. It was reverence. The kind of quiet you keep when you're holding something that doesn't belong to you alone. This was the last letter Sarah sent, he said gently. I didn't open it right away. I couldn't. The envelope rested on the table beside him. The paper in his hands was soft at the corners, worn from being unfolded and read again and again. He opened it carefully, as if it might fall apart if handled too quickly. "If you're still with me," he said, glancing at the audience, "I'd like to read it now." Not a sound stirred in the room. No coughs, no shifting, just breath held in unison. Keanu began. "Dear Mr. Reeves," he read, "if you're reading this, I guess I'm gone." He paused. His eyes fluttered shut for a moment, grounding himself before continuing. "But that's okay," he read. "This isn't about sadness, this is about gratitude." Keanu's voice softened but carried. "I didn't want to be remembered as the girl who died," he read, "but as the girl who believed in someone." Another pause. Then he looked up slightly, his voice steady but touched with something raw. "And I believed in you." The words sat heavy on the room, but not like a weight, more like a truth. Keanu took a breath and read on. "Not the movie star," Sarah wrote, "the man beneath it, the quiet one, the one who always seemed like he knew what pain sounded like." His voice faltered there just slightly. He paused, eyes blinking fast, then gathered himself again. "I watched you, you know," the letter continued. "Not in the big roles, but in the small moments." Keanu's fingers gripped the page gently as he read her next line. "The way you gave up your seat on the subway, the way you waited with a stranger who dropped her groceries." He looked out at the audience again. "You reminded me that kindness still exists." The studio felt smaller now, like the walls had moved in closer, just to hold the space more tightly around them. "I know you didn't write back," Keanu read, "and that's okay. You didn't owe me anything. I just wanted you to know you were helping me without even knowing it." Keanu stopped for a moment. He pressed the page against his knee, grounding himself again, then continued. "I asked my mom to send you this," he read, "because I didn't want to disappear completely. I wanted to stay close to someone who made me feel seen in a world that so often looked away." He lowered the paper just slightly and looked down. "She didn't want to be remembered as someone dying," he said softly. "She wanted to be remembered for believing in someone." He paused again, and in the stillness you could feel it. She had been heard. Keanu looked down at the letter again. The ink faded slightly at the edges, but the emotion inside each word still vivid. "She wrote," he continued. "I know it's a strange request, but if you're wearing this locket, or even just holding it, thank you for carrying a piece of me, even if just for a little while." His voice trembled, but he didn't stop. "That line," he said, lowering the letter, "that line stayed with me." He looked toward the locket on the table. The chain shimmered faintly, unmoving, and yet it felt as if the room pulsed around it. She didn't ask for remembrance. She didn't ask to be immortalized. She asked to be close, to feel seen, to matter. He paused, letting the truth of it settle into the quiet. "I've worn so many things in my life," he said. "Costumes, tuxedos, uniforms, but nothing has ever felt like this." He gently touched the locket again, his fingers tracing the engraved word on the back. "Still." "She gave this to me not to make a statement, but to pass something on," he said. "Not her illness, not her struggle, but her belief." He glanced at the letter once more. "I didn't think I had anything to offer her," he admitted. "I didn't think I could hold something so sacred." He looked directly at the host for the first time in several minutes. "But apparently, I did. At least to her. And that's a lot to carry." The host's eyes shimmered slightly, his jaw set in quiet respect. Keanu turned his attention back to the audience. "She never asked me to change her life," he said. "She just asked to be remembered by someone she believed in." He closed the letter and held it against his chest. "And now I do." He sat quietly for a few long moments. No music swelled, no cue cards shifted. Just stillness, warm and respectful. "I used to think being remembered meant doing something big," Keanu said finally. Winning awards, breaking records, leaving a legacy. He shook his head slightly. But Sarah showed me something different. He looked around the room, voice softer now but resonant. His presence is the greatest gift we give. That sometimes being there in someone's life, even quietly, even unknowingly, is enough. The host leaned forward slightly, but still, Keanu continued. She taught me that the smallest things, a gesture, a glance, a letter, can carry more love than 1,000 grand gestures. He placed the folded letter gently back inside the envelope, sealing it with the same care you'd give to something ancient. I didn't respond to her while she was alive, he said, but I can carry her now. He looked down at the envelope, his fingers resting on it softly. And I will. Keanu rested the envelope on the table again, his hand lingering over it for just a second longer before pulling back. He leaned into the silence. He didn't rush to fill it, and no one in the room dared to break it. There's something strange about grief, he said finally, especially when it's for someone you never met. He looked down at his hands. You start to wonder if you have the right to feel it. His voice was steady now, not strong in the way people expect strength to sound, but steady in the way a person sounds when they've accepted something that hurts. But Sarah's grief didn't come with rules, he said. It came with grace. He looked toward the camera, the audience beyond it, the people watching from their living rooms or phones or hospital beds. Wherever this story might reach them, she didn't want to be remembered as a girl who lost a fight, he said. She wanted to be remembered for how fiercely she loved, how bravely she believed, how intentionally she gave. He paused, and the quiet felt like something alive. She believed in me, he said, and I didn't even know it. His eyes scanned the crowd again. I wonder how many people around us are carrying that kind of belief in silence. How many are offering us their light and we don't see it, not because we're careless, but because we've forgotten to look. He took a long breath. Sarah never asked to be the center of attention. She never asked to be anyone's burden. She just wanted someone to know she was here. He looked back at the locket once more. And now she is. He stood slowly, only for a moment, and picked up the chain. The locket hung from his fingers like a whisper of something larger than memory. She'd told her mom, he said softly, that she didn't want a headstone. She didn't want a place people would visit out of guilt. She wanted to live inside something. Something that kept moving. Something that stayed warm. He wrapped the chain gently around his fingers. So she chose this. She chose someone. He looked up again, eyes glistening but calm. I don't know if I can live up to what she believed about me, he said, but I can promise this. I won't ignore it anymore. He placed the locket over his head and let it rest against his chest, just over his heart. For the first time in a long time, he said, I feel like I'm carrying something real. He sat down again. The letter and the locket now rested with him. Not as props, not as performance, but as presence. And if you're listening, he said softly, and you've ever felt like your kindness didn't matter, I'm here to tell you it did. He looked out at the audience one last time, because Sarah's did. Keanu held the locket in the quiet, the silver cool against his fingertips. He turned it slowly, letting it catch the soft lights of the stage. Then he flipped it over, revealing a single word engraved on the back, a word so small you might miss it if you weren't really looking. Each says, Still, Keanu said, voice barely above a whisper. He paused, the word lingering between breaths. Just that, he repeated. The room didn't stir. The word seemed to hush even the air itself. I stared at that word for a long time, Keanu said. When I first saw it, I didn't know what it meant. Still what? Still alive? Still broken? Still here? He looked down at the locket, as if trying to read something beyond the engraving. But the more I thought about it, he continued, the more I realized it wasn't a question. It was a state, a truth. He took a long breath and let it out slowly. Stillness isn't just quiet, he said. It's presence. It's the moment after the tears but before the words. It's the space where you're not trying to fix anything or run from anything. It's where you just are. He traced the edge of the locket with his thumb. Sarah chose that word for a reason, he said. She knew she wouldn't get a long life. She knew pain more intimately than most of us ever will. But she also knew something about peace. He looked toward the host for the briefest moment, then back down, and in her stillness, she left something behind. Keanu lifted his eyes to the crowd. I've lived most of my life running, he said. Running from grief, from guilt, from silence. I thought movement was the only way to stay alive. I thought if I stayed busy enough, loud enough, visible enough, maybe I wouldn't have to feel what I was carrying. He shook his head slightly. But she reminded me that stillness isn't the absence of life. Sometimes it's the most alive we ever are. He looked back at the locket, his voice growing more tender. Still means I'm still feeling her, he said. Still remembering, still learning how to be seen, still letting her teach me how to love without noise. A soft tear fell, tracing the side of his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. The host remained quiet, leaning forward slightly, hands folded, but saying nothing. He understood the sacredness of the moment. It didn't need words, it needed space. I've read scripts my entire life, Keanu said. Lines written to be remembered. Monologues meant to move people. He gently ran his fingers across the word engraved on the locket again. But no line I've ever spoken has held more power than this one word. He exhaled. Still, and in the silence that followed, it felt like the whole world paused to listen. Keanu let the locket rest on his chest again, his palm gently over it, as if shielding it from the weight of the room. But the truth was, the weight wasn't outside. It was inside him, pressing softly, asking not to be ignored. I think about what that word means to people who are grieving, he said. Still grieving, still missing, still waiting. It doesn't go away, you know, it just settles. He let that thought hang, not rushing past it. There's this belief, he said, that you move on, that time does something magical, that it heals everything. But sometimes it doesn't heal. It just makes the silence louder. The host shifted slightly in his seat, still saying nothing, still listening. I remember the night I got the envelope, Keanu continued. I was alone, no lights, no music, just me in a kitchen with this little beige envelope I didn't know how to open. He looked down again. I waited 3 days, he said. I kept moving it from room to room like it might open itself when I was ready. But I wasn't. I wasn't ready to know what it might ask of me. He gently rubbed the corner of his eye and let his hand fall to his lap again. And when I finally opened it, when I saw the locket, that word, it was like she was saying, I'm not gone. I'm just still. His voice trembled, but didn't break. Still present, still part of the world, even if the world keeps turning without her. He leaned forward slightly. Do you know how rare that is? He asked quietly. To feel someone's presence without ever hearing their voice? No one answered. They didn't need to. The room itself was a kind of reply. I've acted in scenes where everything is scripted, where every moment is built to create an emotion, Keanu said. But this moment, right here, this isn't acting. This is what it means to be human. He looked at the audience again, and being human means we carry people. Not in our schedules or on social media posts, but in the quiet, in the car ride when the music stops, in the space between one breath and the next, in the way we whisper their names when no one's listening. His hand touched the locket again. Sarah understood that, he said. She didn't ask to be remembered loudly. She asked to be carried gently. He looked down at the table, the letter still resting there, folded. I used to think I had to earn stillness, he said, that I had to do something first, accomplish, survive, win. But maybe stillness isn't something you earn. Maybe it's something you give to others, to yourself. His voice grew quieter, more like prayer than speech. And in that stillness, maybe you finally hear the things that always mattered most. Keanu sat back in his chair. The locket rose and fell with each breath, small and unassuming, yet now carrying the gravity of a story too large to measure. His gaze drifted toward the soft lighting above the audience, where no camera pointed, where no script waited. "I've lived through a lot of noise," he said quietly. "Fame, loss, applause, headlines. But noise doesn't teach you how to feel. Stillness does." He folded his hands gently in his lap, voice low, words careful. "When I lost people I loved," he said, "I didn't know how to mourn. I didn't cry right away. I didn't scream. I just stopped. Everything slowed. People thought I was strong, quiet, resilient, but I was just still. And I didn't understand that was grief trying to speak in its own language." He looked to the host again, but not for reassurance, just connection. Sarah's stillness, it wasn't absence. It was presence, a deep, steady presence. And I think that's why she chose that word. He leaned slightly forward. "We live in a world that tells us to move fast," he said. "Grieve quickly, smile on cue, post something inspiring and get back to work." He let out a small, tired breath. But there's no shortcut to healing, no speed limit on memory. Sometimes the only way forward is to be still. The host finally spoke, softly. "Stillness takes courage." Keanu nodded. "It does, and Sarah had more courage than I've ever known." He looked down again at the locket. "I wear this," he said, "not because I have answers, but because I want to remember how to listen. To others, to myself, to whatever this is that still connects us, even when someone's gone." Another tear slid down his cheek. This time, he didn't blink it away. "She gave me permission to stop pretending I had to be whole all the time," he said, "to stop performing strength and just sit with what is." He looked to the crowd. "And what is that someone I never met saw something good in me, something quiet and unfinished, and believed it was worth holding on to." He gently pressed the locket to his chest. "That's stillness," he said. "It's not the end of motion, it's the beginning of presence." The room remained silent, not tense, not unsure, just still. A kind of shared breath between strangers, tethered by something sacred. "I used to think you had to speak loudly to be heard," Keanu said, "but Sarah's whisper echoed louder than any shout." He paused. "So now I carry that whisper." He looked toward the locket one more time, then to the audience. "If you ever wonder what it means to be remembered, let this be your answer. It's not the noise you leave behind. It's the stillness you create in someone else." Keanu's hand rested over the locket again, fingers curling slightly as if holding onto something both fragile and infinite. He sat in the stillness a while longer, the weight of everything said and unsaid pressing against the walls of the studio. "I almost didn't come tonight," he said quietly. The audience shifted ever so slightly, not out of restlessness but in subtle anticipation. He wasn't just reflecting now, he was confessing. "I had the envelope sitting on my desk for days," he continued. "I'd walk past it, I'd see it, but I wouldn't touch it, wouldn't even look directly at it." He paused and let the memory return fully. "I told myself it was too personal, that it belonged to another part of me, a private part, one the world doesn't usually see." His voice softened further. "I thought, maybe I'll just keep it. Read the letter, hold the locket, and that'll be enough. I don't need to say anything out loud. I don't need to bring it into the world." He looked up slowly. But then I reread one of Sarah's earlier letters, one I thought I'd already absorbed. It was short, only 3 paragraphs. She was telling me about a day at the park with her mom. The sun, the ducks, the breeze. His eyes moved to the side, as if trying to recall every word. And in the middle of it, almost like an afterthought, she wrote, "Maybe your silence is a prayer in disguise." He paused, and the words hung in the air like a thread waiting to be followed. "He stopped me," he said. His fingers moved slightly on the armrest, a small physical echo of the stillness inside him. I read that line over and over. I didn't remember it from the first time, or maybe I wasn't ready to see it. But now, it felt like she had written it just for this moment. He nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. My whole life, silence has followed me. Not just in interviews, or in the way I avoid the spotlight, but real silence, deep silence, the kind that shows up when you lose someone, when you're a child sitting at a kitchen table and no one comes home. The host lowered his eyes slightly, his hands still folded tightly in front of him. "I used to think silence meant something was wrong," Keanu said, "that it was the absence of love, the space where people should be, but aren't." He looked around the room, letting his eyes land softly on the faces watching him. But what if silence is also something holy, something sacred? What if it's not a void but a vessel? He leaned forward a little, his voice steady but thick with emotion. What if silence is the way some of us pray, without even knowing it? Keanu took a breath, deeper this time. He pressed his fingers together, eyes lowered in thought, before he continued. "Sarah saw something in my silence that I never allowed myself to see," he said. "She didn't interpret it as distance or apathy or avoidance. She saw it as reverence, as care." He let that sink in, then slowly looked out toward the audience again. "I've lost count of how many people over the years have asked me why I'm so quiet, why I don't talk more, why I'm not louder about the things I care about. But Sarah, she never asked. She understood." His voice cracked slightly, not from strain, but from the quiet realization of what it meant to be understood without having to explain yourself. "She didn't try to fix my silence," he said. "She held it." Another pause followed, filled with something heavy but warm. "There's something about being truly seen," he said. "Not in the way we usually mean it. Not the kind that comes with attention or applause or headlines. I mean the kind of seeing that doesn't need answers. The kind that accepts the stillness, the shadow, the parts of you you're not sure are worth showing." He blinked slowly. "And somehow, this young woman I never met, she saw that version of me." He leaned forward, voice softening again. "When I read her line, 'Maybe your silence is a prayer in disguise,' it was like she reached into something I hadn't even admitted to myself." He looked toward the host, then back to his lap. "As a kid, I used to sit outside after school, sometimes for hours. I wouldn't talk, I wouldn't play, just sit and watch the trees move." He paused, eyes drifting. "I didn't have the words for it then, but I think I was grieving even then. I just didn't know what for yet." The locket moved gently on his chest as he shifted. "When my father left, no one really explained anything, they just stopped mentioning him. And that silence, at first it felt like protection. Then it started to feel like punishment, like I had done something wrong." His voice wavered now, but he continued. "I think that's when I learned to live quietly, not because I didn't want to speak, but because I was afraid of what speaking might change, afraid it might break something." He exhaled. "And then I became known for that silence. People started calling it mystery or humility or strength." He smiled faintly, but it didn't feel like strength to me, it felt like hiding. The studio remained absolutely still. And then this girl, Sarah, barely out of college, dealing with more pain than most of us will ever know, writes to me and calls it a prayer. He shook his head slowly. "She saw holiness in what I thought was broken." Keanu's eyes glistened under the studio lights, But he didn't brush the tears away. He let them remain, quiet as his thoughts, resting at the edge of something too long buried. "That's what stopped me from walking away tonight," he said. "That one line. One sentence in a letter I almost didn't read again. Maybe your silence is a prayer in disguise." He glanced toward the envelope on the table, his gaze gentle, like looking at an old friend. "I don't know if Sarah knew what those words would do," he continued. "I don't know if she ever expected me to read them at all. But I did, and it changed everything." His fingers moved slowly across the chain of the locket once more. "Because for the first time," he said, "I stopped feeling ashamed of being quiet." He paused, his voice steady, almost reverent. "I realized that silence isn't just something I live with. It's something I give. It's a way of holding space for others, a way of listening, even when I don't know what to say." He sat up straighter now, the heaviness still present, but no longer suffocating. "Keane saw the person underneath the quiet," he said. "Not the character, not the myth, just the man who wasn't sure his stillness had meaning." He smiled softly, a fragile kind of smile, the kind that doesn't ask to be returned. "I've had people write to me over the years, telling me I've inspired them. But Sarah, she didn't write because I inspired her. She wrote because she understood me." He folded his hands and let them rest in his lap, his voice now more measured, as if speaking directly to her across time and space. "And maybe that's the kind of connection that changes you the most, not the one that praises you, but the one that sees you." He glanced toward the audience again, their silence a reflection of his own. "I spent a long time trying to fill that silence with action, with work, with doing. But now I understand, maybe I was meant to carry it, not as a burden, but as a mirror." He touched the locket again. "Sarah held that mirror up for me, and she didn't flinch." He looked toward the host. "And that's why I couldn't keep this to myself. I didn't come here tonight for catharsis. I came because she asked me to carry something, and I think she meant for it to be shared." He leaned forward slightly. "I don't have the right words. I don't know if I ever will. But I have this silence, and maybe, just maybe, that's enough." He sat back, letting the stillness return. In that quiet, a new kind of truth settled across the room. One not built with sound or applause, but with presence. And as the locket rose and fell gently with each breath, it was clear. Keanu was no longer afraid of the silence. He had finally begun to understand it. Keanu sat quietly for a moment, the room still carrying the weight of his last words. Then he leaned forward again, fingers laced, the locket resting gently on his chest as if it had always been there. "There's something I haven't talked about in years," he said. "And honestly, I didn't think I ever would. But tonight feels different." He looked down at his hands. They weren't trembling, but there was a visible shift in him, a slow return to something long hidden. "Before Sarah," he began, "there was another person who saw me in that same way." He let the thought settle before saying her name. Ewa. The name lingered in the space like a soft breath. Simple, unfamiliar to most, but filled with history. "She was 17, Keanu said. "So was I. We met at a library. I was pretending to study. She wasn't." He smiled faintly, just for a moment. She had this way of sitting in silence that didn't feel empty. She could be 3 feet away from you and make you feel like you were being wrapped in something safe. His eyes glistened. "We didn't date, we didn't kiss, we just existed next to each other. No pressure, no expectations. I'd never known a girl like that before." He took a breath and glanced down. She used to say things like, "You don't have to be interesting to be loved." And at 17, that broke me open. Because I didn't feel interesting. I felt angry, lost, like I was always trying to perform just to belong. He let the silence breathe again. But at Ela, she didn't ask for anything. She just paid attention to everything. The way my shoulders tensed when someone raised their voice. The way I never sat with my back to the door. The way I never took more than I needed. He paused, voice softer now. She was the first person who made me feel like I didn't have to earn love. His jaw tightened slightly. And then one night, she didn't make it home. He looked up, eyes distant. Car crash. No goodbye, no warning, just silence. He swallowed hard. I went to the funeral. I stood in the back. I didn't speak to anyone. I left before the service ended. He shook his head. I told myself it was strength, but it wasn't. It was fear. He looked back at the locket on his chest. For years, I buried her memory. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't think I could carry it. His voice cracked slightly. And then Sarah started writing to me. He looked up slowly. She didn't remind me of Isla because of how she looked or how she spoke. She reminded me of Isla because she gave without asking. She saw without needing explanation. And through her letters, I started to remember what it felt like to be seen. Keanu's voice grew quieter now, but steadier, as if saying the name had unlocked something in him, something he had carried for so long, even he had forgotten its full shape. I used to read Sarah's letters late at night, he said, after long days on set, after pretending to be someone else for 12 hours straight. He looked down at the envelope resting on the table. Most people don't know this, but the roles I've played, the quiet ones, the broken ones, the loners, they weren't far from who I really was. They just gave me permission to stay silent without being questioned. He glanced up, not at anyone in particular, just to recenter himself. But when I read Sarah's letters, she wasn't talking to the actor. She wasn't writing to a role. She was writing to the boy who sat in the library next to Ela and didn't know what to do with kindness. His voice slowed again, tender. She'd write about the little things. The way her mom burned toast every morning. How her cat Theo liked to sleep on her chest after chemo. She didn't lead with pain, she led with joy. And somehow, that was more disarming than anything else. He paused, then added, just like Isla did. He leaned back in the chair, the locket settling gently over his heart. Both of them gave me something I didn't even realize I needed. They gave me back parts of myself. His hand moved slowly, resting against his chest where the silver locket lay. Isla taught me that love doesn't need to be loud, that sometimes just sitting beside someone and not asking them to be anything other than what they are is love. He let that linger, then continued. And Sarah reminded me of that when I had long forgotten. She reached into a part of me I thought had been sealed shut. He smiled faintly, a touch of sadness woven in. Leon used to say, "You don't need to tell me everything. I can hear what you're not saying." He looked toward the locket again. Sarah heard that too. Through my silence, through my distance, through every unreturned letter, she still stayed. Keanu's voice dropped, almost to a whisper. So I think that's why it hurt so much when the envelope arrived. Because I realized I had been given a second chance to feel something I had buried, and I almost missed it again. The audience remained motionless, holding space for the boy behind the man, the pain behind the presence. Mila was the first person who saw me, he said. Sarah was the one who reminded me how to look back. He closed his eyes, just for a moment, his breathing calm. Sometimes, he said softly, you don't know how deep a wound is until someone touches it with kindness. Keanu opened his eyes again, slower this time, as if returning from someplace far away. I think the most painful part of losing someone young, he said, is not just the loss itself. It's everything that doesn't get said. Everything you were waiting to share someday. All the moments that never got built. He let out a quiet breath and looked toward the edge of the stage, somewhere past the lights. Vila never knew what she meant to me, he said, and I never told her. I kept waiting for the right moment, for more time. But time has no loyalty. He looked back to the audience. And that's why Sarah's letters hit me the way they did. She didn't wait. He picked up the envelope again, thumb grazing the worn fold, as if tracing every inch she once touched. She didn't wait to say what she felt. She didn't wait to give what she could. Even when her life was ending, she chose to give light. He swallowed hard. And that made me wonder, how many people out there are holding on to their Ela? How many of us have someone who once made us feel whole, but we never said it out loud? He paused, scanning the crowd. We carry these names in our hearts, these echoes, and we think we're the only ones doing it. He let his hand fall gently back to his lap. But we're not. He leaned forward just slightly. Sarah taught me that the things we think are too quiet to matter, those are the very things that live the longest. His eyes glistened again. Grief doesn't end, it just changes shape. And when I read her letters, I wasn't just hearing her voice. I was hearing Isla's too. I was hearing all the things I never said, all the things I didn't know how to feel at 17. The room stayed still, sacred in its silence. Lila never asked me to be anything, he said. She just showed up. She just existed beside me. He touched the locket once more, and that's what Sarah did. In every word, in every page. She sat beside me from miles away, through time and pain and silence. He looked toward the host now, voice steady but soft. Do you know what it feels like to be seen like that? Not praised, not idolized, just understood. The host didn't answer. He didn't need to. Keanu sat back again. For a long time, I thought the past was something you leave behind. But Sarah made me realize it's something we carry. Not with shame, but with care. He looked toward the lights, then back at the letter. And maybe that's how we heal, not by forgetting the people we lost, but by finally allowing ourselves to remember them fully. He closed his eyes one last time. Isla saw me. Sarah reminded me. And now, for the first time in decades, I finally see myself. Keanu leaned back in his chair, his hand resting lightly over the locket, the other tracing the edge of the envelope. The audience was silent, still caught in the echo of the name he'd just spoken. Ela. But his next words shifted the story inward, towards something even more vulnerable. There's something strange about being known by millions of people, he said. They know your face, your walk, your voice, but they don't really know you. He looked toward the studio lights above him, eyes half-lidded with memory. After a while, you start to feel like a silhouette, something projected, watched, admired maybe, but empty. His voice was calm, but filled with weight. There was a time, he said slowly, when I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back. He let that sentence settle for a long moment before continuing. You had the same eyes, the same voice, the same tired smile. But he didn't feel like me. He glanced out across the audience. I'd walk red carpets, smile for photos, shake hands with people I'd never see again. And when it was over, I'd go home and sit in a room so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. He looked at the floor now. That's the part people don't see. The silence between the roles, the quiet after the interviews, the nights when you're not acting, but you still don't feel real. His fingers moved across the locket again. I didn't know how much I was disappearing, he said. Not from the world, but from myself. He paused. Until Sarah started writing? The energy in the room shifted again, gently. The audience could feel it. The return to the letters, to the bridge between two strangers who were never really strangers at all. He never called me a legend, Keanu said. Never used words like icon or hero. She wrote to me like I was just a man. He smiled faintly, a smile touched with awe and sadness. And she asked questions no one else had ever asked me. Not about fame, not about roles, but about feelings, about fear, about the weight of silence. He tapped the envelope gently. She asked me once, "Do you ever get tired of being strong?" His voice caught slightly. I'd never answered that question, even in my own head. But when I read it from her, I cried. He glanced at the host, whose eyes were fixed on him, not with curiosity, but with care. She reminded me that I wasn't invisible beneath the image, that somewhere underneath all the headlines and expectations, I still mattered, even if I didn't always believe it. Keanu leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and that changed something in me. Because when someone sees you that clearly, it becomes impossible to keep pretending that you're just the mask. Keanu took a deep breath, then exhaled slowly. The moment lingered. Nothing in the room moved. I used to think being seen was dangerous, he said, like it gave people the power to take something from you, and maybe in some ways it does. But Sarah, she didn't take. She returned something I hadn't even noticed was missing. He looked out toward the darkened corners of the studio, as if searching for the younger version of himself hidden in the shadows. When you play characters for decades, you start to get confused about what parts are you and what parts were borrowed, he said. You rehearse grief, you rehearse love, you even rehearse silence. He paused again. But when I was off camera, when the makeup was gone and the room was dark, I didn't know what was left. His thumb ran gently along the edge of the velvet pouch. I started feeling like I existed more in stories than in life. He looked down, and honestly, that scared me. Because if you exist only as a projection, who are you when no one's watching? There was a long silence before he continued. Sarah's letters cut through all that. His voice warmed as he went on. She didn't ask about the roles I played. She asked about who I was when I wasn't performing. What I thought about when I couldn't sleep. What I remembered when I missed someone. He smiled faintly. She didn't care about my filmography. She cared about my humanity. He sat back, a new lightness in his posture, even as his words remained heavy. One of her letters came during a stretch when I was struggling. Quietly, I hadn't told anyone. Wasn't sure if I could. I felt hollow, like the man I had become was made out of mirrors, just reflections bouncing off other people's expectations. He looked toward the ceiling for a moment, collecting himself. And in that letter, he said, she wrote, I don't know what your days feel like, but if they're ever lonely, I hope you remember this. You matter to someone who sees the real you, even if the world doesn't. He stopped, swallowed, blinked back moisture. Sentence, it didn't just land, it echoed. He glanced toward the envelope again. He wrote like someone who had no more time to waste. Like every word had weight. No fluff. No pretense. Just truth. He shook his head slightly, in wonder more than disbelief. And in a world where so much is fake, that kind of honesty, it leaves a mark. He looked around the room, his gaze now direct and present. That's what people don't understand about fame. It doesn't make you immune to doubt. If anything, it isolates you from the kind of truth you need most. His hand rested again over the locket. But Sarah gave that to me. Not because I earned it, but because she believed I deserved to feel real again. Keanu sat up straighter now, but there was no guard in his posture, only openness. His voice, still soft, carried deeper resonance than before. For so long, he said, I thought my silence meant distance, like I had nothing left to give. But Sarah showed me that silence isn't absence. Sometimes it's presence in its purest form. He paused and looked toward the floor for a brief moment. She saw through the screen, through the fame, through the illusion. He let out a slow breath. There's a difference between being watched and being witnessed. The world watched me. Sarah witnessed me. A wave of emotion stirred in the audience, silent, invisible, but deeply felt. That's not easy for me to admit, he added, because there's a part of me that's always felt like I had to earn love, that being known meant being judged. He leaned forward slightly, but she didn't ask for explanations. She didn't dissect me. She just offered her presence, her story, her heart. He tapped the envelope gently once again, as if acknowledging its fragile contents. I used to believe that being admired was enough, he said. But admiration is distant. It keeps people on pedestals. Sarah didn't want to admire me. She wanted to remind me I was human. He closed his eyes for a moment, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was allowed to be one. His voice broke gently on that final word. When I think about all those years of hiding behind characters, I realize now I wasn't avoiding people. I was avoiding myself, the self that still felt grief, the self that still carried guilt, the self that didn't know if he mattered outside of someone else's story. He placed his hand firmly over the locket. But Sarah changed that? He looked up. Eve changed it, not by saying I was great, but by saying I was enough. The audience remained silent, but the tension in the room shifted. Less grief now, more reverence. I've met heads of state. I've shaken hands with billionaires. But no one's ever made me feel more seen than a 23-year-old girl with stage 4 cancer and a box of envelopes. He smiled faintly through tears now forming again. And that's what this world forgets, that it's not titles or trophies or cameras that bring us back to ourselves. It's letters. It's listening. It's being remembered by someone who didn't need to, but did anyway. He looked down once more at the envelope, then, slowly, up toward the audience. She didn't heal me, he said, but she reminded me that I wasn't beyond healing. And with that, he placed both hands in his lap, the silence around him no longer empty. It was full of memory, of meaning, of the truth beneath the legend. Keanu sat with the letter resting gently on his knee, his fingertips pressing the creases like they were made of silk. The room was still, so still that every breath, every heartbeat, seemed to hum with quiet electricity. There was one line, he began, that I've never stopped thinking about. His eyes looked distant, as if he were seeing the words again on paper, burned into memory. He wrote, "The world may love the legend, but I see the man still learning how to breathe." He stopped, eyes glistening, his lips pressed together, holding back something heavier than tears. Then, with a steady inhale, he continued, "I'd read it late at night, long after the world had gone quiet. No spotlight, no audience, just me. And those words." His hand moved to his chest, where the locket now hung. For a moment he held it there, not as a gesture, but as an instinct. I didn't realize until that moment how long I'd been holding my breath. Not literally, but inside. He glanced toward the floor. It's like I'd been walking through life with a weight on my chest I couldn't name. Success didn't lift it. Applause didn't loosen it. But those words, they cracked something open. He looked up again, softer now. Sheen saw what I didn't know how to say, that I wasn't finished becoming, that I was still learning how to just be, without armor, without lines, without a role to play. The audience leaned in, emotionally drawn not just to what was said, but how rawly it was delivered. "Most people don't want to look at the cracks," Keanu said. "They want the polished surface. They want the hero, not the man beneath the weight." He paused and smiled faintly, almost like an apology. But Sarah, she saw the cracks in the glass and didn't look away. He ran a finger along the locket again. Sheen called them beautiful. He looked at the host, who hadn't spoken in minutes, his eyes damp, his body leaning forward with empathy. "There's something sacred," Keanu continued, "about being seen and still accepted. No correction, no fixing, just recognition." He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees, his voice softer than before. "Sarah didn't ask me to be more than I was. She didn't worship the actor. She didn't demand answers. She just let me be the man learning how to breathe." He took a long pause, his chest rising slowly with a controlled inhale, then exhaling, as if offering the grief back to the universe. And in that moment, he said, something inside me whispered back. His lips parted gently, and then he spoke, not to the crowd, not to the host, but to the quiet space around him. "I see you too." The words floated in the room like they had always been waiting there. The audience didn't stir. No shifting in seats, no clearing of throats. Just stillness. The kind that happens when everyone knows something real has just been said. Keanu remained seated, his hand over the locket and his gaze far beyond the studio lights. "I think," he said slowly, "a lot of us walk around waiting for someone to tell us it's okay to be unfinished, that we're not broken, just still becoming." He paused, then looked down at the floor, as if reliving a moment only he could see. Gave me that," he said. "Permission to not be complete, permission to be in progress, and still be worthy of love." The word love landed with a thud in the room. Not romantic love, not fan love, but something quieter, truer. The love of being known. The love of being allowed. "Every time I read that letter, I feel her presence," he continued. "Not as someone who's gone, but someone who's still whispering, still seeing." He exhaled again. "You know, when I hold this locket, it doesn't feel like grief anymore. Not fully. It feels like a reminder that someone looked at my life, not the red carpets, not the roles, and still said, 'I see you.'" He smiled gently, not from happiness, but from understanding. There's a moment in every person's life when they ask, even silently, "Do I matter?" And most people never get a clear answer. They just keep searching. He looked out into the audience now, fully present. "But Sarah gave me mine, and not in a grand way, not with fanfare, just quietly, through a sentence that changed everything." He opened the letter again, and his voice was calm, reverent. "The world may love the legend, but I see the man still learning how to breathe." He folded the letter with care, like a sacred artifact, and tucked it gently back into the envelope. The gesture was simple, but the meaning behind it weighed like ceremony. "He saw me," he said again. "And that kind of seeing, it heals something deeper than applause ever could." The host finally spoke, voice hushed. "And now you're passing it on." Keanu turned to him, surprised at first by the words, then slowly nodded. "Maybe that's the only way to honor something like this," he said. "To see someone else, to hold space for their unfinished story, to say, 'I see you too.'" A silence fell again, but this time it felt full, not hollow. It felt like something sacred had just been shared, not lost. Keanu stood slowly, still holding the envelope and the locket close to his chest. He looked around the studio, not as an actor, not as a public figure, but as a man learning, grieving, becoming. "I don't know what she saw in me," he said, "but I'm starting to believe it's something worth holding on to." And with those final words, he bowed his head, whispering so softly it was almost missed. "She saw me, and now I see." The hush that followed Keanu's final words lingered in the room like fog, gentle, thick with reverence. But then, softly, there was a movement. From the far edge of the stage, a figure stepped forward. It wasn't a stagehand. It wasn't a producer. The host leaned in, unsure of what was happening. The woman was in her late 50s, with a calm but tired grace about her. Her gray sweater clung loosely to her small frame, and in her hand was a single object, small, silver, gleaming faintly under the lights. Keanu looked up, and for the first time that evening, he seemed completely unguarded. "Marlene," he whispered. The woman nodded. Her voice was barely above a breath. "I wasn't supposed to come out," she said, "but I had to see you, just once." Keanu stood slowly. For a moment, the world around them fell away. The cameras didn't matter. The crowd didn't exist. It was just two people, stitched together by loss and gratitude. Marlene walked closer and extended her hand. Nestled in her palm was a flash drive. "She wanted you to have this," she said softly. "She made it the night she knew. It wouldn't be long." Keanu reached out, his hands trembling slightly. He took the flash drive as if it were made of glass, fragile, fine. "She recorded a message for you," Marlene added. "She asked me to deliver it if you opened the envelope." Keanu nodded, unable to find words. He turned slowly toward the host, who quietly signaled to the crew. No one needed instructions. It was understood. The studio screen dimmed. The lights dropped to a low, respectful glow. And then, the video began. At first, it was quiet, just the ambient hum of a hospital room. Then, the image sharpened. Sarah. She was lying in bed, propped up by pillows, her frame thinner than any mother would ever want to see. But her eyes, they were bright, steady, alive in a way that defied what her body was going through. She smiled. "Hi, Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice light and a little raspy but full of warmth. "If you're seeing this, I guess it means you got my envelope. Thank you for not throwing it away." The room didn't move, not a breath, not a shuffle. "I didn't know how to say goodbye," Sarah continued. "So instead I wanted to say thank you, but not for the reasons you might think." Her gaze softened as she looked slightly off camera, as if searching for something deeper within herself. "You didn't save me by doing," she said. "You saved me by being." Keanu blinked, the words hitting him like waves against stone. "You were the first person I ever saw on screen who looked quiet inside," Sarah said. "And when I was young and scared and sick, that quiet felt like home." She smiled again, this time smaller. "You gave me a place in the world, even if we never met. That matters more than you know." Keanu's hand moved slowly to his chest, the locket resting beneath his shirt, rising and falling with each uneven breath. On the screen, Sarah's voice carried with quiet resolve. "I know you probably think you don't deserve this," she said, gently smiling through the effort of speaking. "That you're just some guy doing his best to stay invisible. But the thing is, I saw you. And I think a lot of people did. They just didn't know how to say it." She paused, her eyes drifting upward, lost in thought for a second. "I saw you in the way you waited in the rain, for someone else's ride to come before getting in your own. In the way you listened more than you spoke. In the way you didn't try to fix the world. But you didn't look away from it either." Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, his fingers gripping the edge of his seat. His jaw trembled slightly. "You didn't have to do big things to matter," Sarah said, her voice softer now. "You just had to be, and that was enough for me." He looked directly into the camera, her gaze steady but vulnerable. "I don't know if I'll be remembered, but if I am, I hope it's for this. For believing in someone who didn't know they were still worth believing in." The screen flickered for just a second, the signal straining to keep up with her fading voice. "I want you to carry that locket," she added. "Not because it's mine, but because it reminds you that you're not alone. You never were, and you never will be." She offered one last smile. "I'll see you somewhere quieter." And then the screen faded to black. Silence took over the room. Keanu sat motionless, the weight of her words pressing down like gravity. He tried to speak, but no sound came. A single tear traced his cheek, then another. But he didn't wipe them away. He let them fall. Marlene stepped forward once again, her own eyes red with emotion. She recorded that 2 days before she passed, she said. "She insisted I keep it secret until the right moment. She said you'd know when." Keanu looked at her. Not with pity, not with grief, but with reverence. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. "You already did," Marlene replied. "You showed up." He nodded slowly, his breath uneven, the pain raw but real. "I thought I was just a part of her story," he said. "You were," Marlene answered. "But she became part of yours too." There was no applause, no music, no fanfare. Just a man holding on to silence like it was sacred. And in that stillness, something unspoken passed between them. Not closure, but continuation. Keanu turned back to the audience, his voice still fragile. She didn't ask me to change the world, she just asked me to stay in it. And as the final light dimmed, his silhouette remained seated on the edge of the stage, still, quiet, and utterly transformed. The air inside the studio remained motionless, as if even the walls were holding their breath. Keanu stayed seated, his shoulders rising and falling with the slow rhythm of someone carrying far more than his own sorrow. Beside him, Marlene reached into her coat pocket with care, her hand trembling slightly as she pulled out a folded piece of paper. "It was the last thing she wrote," she whispered, holding it out to him. "She asked me not to read it, said it was only for you." Keanu looked down at the paper. It was soft around the edges, worn from being handled, as though Sarah herself had folded and unfolded it many times while searching for the right words. He accepted it gently. His fingers moved carefully over the crease, pausing for a moment before opening it. When he did, his eyes scanned the page, taking in every letter like a prayer. He took a long breath. Then, he began to read. "Dear Mr. Reeves, if you're holding this, it means I trusted the world to carry my love to you." His voice was low, but steady. The words filled the studio with something warmer than sound, something alive. "I know this letter won't change your life," he read on, "but it might remind you why it matters." He stopped, swallowed, then continued. "You once said in an interview that you weren't sure what people saw in you, that you just tried to stay honest. That stayed with me, because I think honesty is its own kind of art, and you've mastered it, even if you don't know it." A tear slipped from the corner of his eye, but his voice held strong. "You were never just someone I admired. You were someone I believed in." His breath caught. He lowered the note for a moment, placing a hand over his face, collecting himself. But the words waited patiently. He lifted the letter again and finished the final line. "You didn't need to answer me. You just needed to be exactly who you are. That was enough for me. That will always be enough." The letter fell slightly in his lap, his hand releasing it slowly, like letting go of something sacred. He said nothing for a long moment, not because there were no words, but because there were too many. Marlene stepped closer and laid a hand gently on his shoulder. "Race," she whispered. Keanu turned to her, his eyes wet, his heart open in a way it hadn't been in years. "She was more than words," he said softly. "She was understanding, without needing to be loud." Marlene nodded, her lips trembling with a quiet smile. "She never wanted attention," she said. "She just wanted to leave something soft in a world that could be so hard." Keanu looked down at the letter again, now resting in his palm like a piece of her soul. The locket still pressed against his chest beneath his shirt, as if it were echoing every heartbeat in time with hers. The lights above dimmed slightly, the atmosphere folding in around them with intimacy and reverence. The cameras remained, but the moment belonged to neither lens nor broadcast. It belonged to something deeper, something human. Keanu looked out across the silent room. Some in the audience had their heads bowed, others simply watched, moved by the stillness that had settled like snow on every corner of the studio. He folded the letter again, pressing it to his heart with both hands. His fingers trembled, but he didn't let go. "She said I was enough," he said quietly. "I don't think I've ever believed that." Marlene stepped beside him and sat gently at the edge of the couch. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The weight of the moment had already said everything. Keanu turned slightly, speaking not just to her, but to everyone listening, whether in the room or through the screen. "We don't always get to know how we affect someone," he said. "Sometimes you move through the world thinking you're invisible, that the things you do don't matter, and then someone like Sarah comes along and proves you wrong with a letter." And hush rippled through the audience. No clapping, no dramatic score, just stillness. Again, he smiled faintly, remembering something. She didn't want to be remembered as the girl who died. She wanted to be remembered for believing. That's what she said. Marlene nodded, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She believed in you when the world was loud, she said, and you showed up when it mattered most. Keanu turned the locket over in his hand again, rubbing his thumb across the back where the word still was engraved. I used to think stillness was emptiness, he said, his voice a little hoarse. But now I think it's where love lives. The host, who had been respectfully silent for most of the exchange, finally spoke, his voice low. Do you think you'll keep the locket? Keanu didn't hesitate. 80 more at the time. I already am. He stood slowly, the note still in his pocket, the locket against his chest. His face looked older in that moment, not wise, like someone who had finally made peace with being seen. I think we all get asked in different ways to carry someone, he said. Most of the time, we don't even know it. He paused, his eyes drifting upward as if remembering her voice. But when someone asks with their last breath, you don't say no. The room stayed silent. It wasn't the kind of silence that followed grief. It was the kind that followed grace. Marlene stood beside him, her hand resting over her heart. She would have been so proud of you, she whispered. Keanu looked at her, his eyes tender. No, he said. She would have been proud of herself, and she should be. He took one more look at the crowd, at the cameras, and then at the folded note in his hand. Then he smiled, not for the world, but for the girl who wrote in stillness and believed in shadows. She made me feel real again, he said. And with that, he stepped down from the stage. Not as a legend, not as a guest, but as a man walking back into the world with something sacred in his hands. The night had grown quiet behind the curtains, the world still catching its breath from everything that had just unfolded. Keanu stood in the dim backstage hallway, the letter tucked safely in his pocket and the locket still warm against his skin. He wasn't ready to speak, and thankfully no one asked him to. Marlene approached slowly, her steps measured not by caution, but by respect for the moment still lingering in the air. There's one more thing, she said softly. He turned toward her. His face was different now, calmer somehow, as if something heavy had been set down. She carried a rectangular object wrapped in brown paper, about the size of a small poster. Her hands held it as though it were fragile. Not just physically, but emotionally. She wanted you to have this too, Marlene said. Keanu took it gently, nodding once without asking what it was. Some gifts don't need explanation. They just need space. He peeled back the paper carefully, revealing the painting underneath. His breath caught. The image showed a man sitting alone on a bench beneath a street lamp, rain cascading all around him. His posture was slumped, his head bowed. But radiating from his chest was a soft, golden light, subtle but unmistakable. The light shimmered in the otherwise gray world, reaching beyond the shadows, touching even the puddles on the ground. At the very bottom of the canvas, written in uneven, delicate lettering, were the words, "You are the lighthouse, even when you don't see the shore." Keanu stared at it. For a long time, he said nothing. His hands gripped the wooden frame, steady but tense, as though the painting had knocked the wind out of him. "I don't," he began, but his voice faltered. Marlene's voice filled the space. "She painted it her last week," she said. She had to tape the brush to her hand. She couldn't grip it anymore, but she said she had to finish it. "For you." Keanu looked at the golden light again, the way it glowed against the man's stillness, the way it didn't ask for attention, didn't demand recognition. It just existed, quiet, steady, unseen but saving everything around it. "That's me," he whispered, eyes fixed on the bench, the posture, the light. "That's how she saw you," Marlene replied. He let out a shaky breath. "But I don't feel like that." "She knew," Marlene said. "She knew you wouldn't see it in yourself. That's why she painted it, so you'd have to look. He reached up and brushed his fingers gently along the brush strokes, feeling the texture beneath his skin. Some lines were faint, others bold. It wasn't polished, it wasn't perfect, but it was full of soul, and he could almost see her, thin, weak, yet determined, pushing that brush across canvas, holding on just long enough to finish what mattered. She gave it everything she had left, Marlene added. Keanu closed his eyes, overwhelmed not by the image, but by the fact that someone had chosen to use their last ounce of strength for him. And not because he was famous, not because he was a movie star, but because she believed he needed to see who he really was. Keanu lowered the painting slightly, his gaze lingering on the words at the bottom. He read them again, barely a whisper this time. "You are the lighthouse, even when you don't see the shore." He repeated them quietly, as if trying to convince himself they were true. "She saw through me," he said, voice low. "Not around me, not past me, through me." Marlene gently nodded. That was her way. She had a gift for seeing what people tried to hide. He leaned against the wall, holding the painting close, unsure what to do with the weight it carried. Not just its physical weight, but the meaning painted into every line. He wasn't used to being the one held up by others. Most of his life, he'd chosen to fade into the background, to live in silence and serve from the shadows. But here, in this moment, there was no hiding. The painting exposed him, and somehow it healed him too. "I don't think I deserve this," he murmured. Marlene stepped beside him. "That's exactly why she made it." He turned to her, the rawness in his expression deeper than anything he'd shown on stage or screen. "She didn't even know me." "She did," Marlene said. "She knew the you that didn't speak. The you that sat with strangers. The you who gave without needing a spotlight." That was the version she painted. Keanu looked down again at the man in the rain. Alone, but glowing. Silent, but radiant. It struck him how accurate it was, because most people looked at him and saw roles. Neo, John Wick, Constantine. But Sarah had looked and seen something else. She saw stillness, she saw pain, and somehow she'd turned that into light. "She gave me something I didn't even know I'd lost," he said quietly. "What's that?" Marlene asked. He looked up, his eyes soft. "Belief." The two stood there in silence, not needing to say much more. Outside the green room, people moved, lights flickered, the show's production resumed its rhythm. But none of that mattered here. Marlene reached into her purse and pulled out a carefully folded slip of paper. "There's one more thing," she said. "She left this with the painting. I think she hoped you'd hang it nearby." Keanu unfolded it. It wasn't a letter. Just a single sentence in Sarah's handwriting. "Even in the rain, you taught me how to shine." He pressed the note to his chest. "I'll hang it," he said, "right above it." Marlene smiled. Not a wide smile, but the kind that carried peace. The kind that says the world doesn't always make sense, but once in a while, it becomes poetry. "Thank you for letting me know her," Keanu said. "She felt like she knew you already," Marlene replied. "And now, maybe, she really does." He nodded, his voice too tight for words. Then, without another sound, he turned toward the dressing room exit, painting in hand. No cameras, no applause, just the quiet promise of taking her light forward. And for the first time in a very long time, he no longer felt alone in the rain. The sky outside Keanu's home was dark and quiet. No paparazzi waited by the gates tonight. No interviews lined up for the morning. It was one of those rare evenings where the world seemed to pause just long enough to let a man breathe. He sat at his kitchen table with only a cup of tea and a notebook. The locket lay beside him. Next to it, the small slip of paper Sarah had written. "Even in the rain, you taught me how to shine." Keanu opened the notebook. The pages were crisp, untouched, clean like silence, but heavy like memory. He picked up a pen. And after staring at the page for a long time, he finally began. Dear Sarah, I never wrote back. I always meant to, but I didn't know how. Or maybe I didn't know if I should. I think part of me felt unworthy of your kindness. I read every one of your letters, but I told myself you were better off never hearing from me. I didn't think I had anything to offer. Tonight changed that. His handwriting was steady, almost meditative. He wasn't trying to sound poetic. He didn't even know what he was really saying. He just knew it was time to speak. You said the world may love the legend, but you saw the man still learning how to breathe. I don't know how you knew. I don't know how you could see what I've tried to hide all these years, but you did. He paused. The tea had gone cold, but he didn't move to warm it. Instead, he kept writing. The truth is, I've spent most of my life talking less and observing more. It made me feel safe. It made me feel in control. But silence also became a wall, and after a while, I started to forget there was anything worth saying. Your letters chipped away at that wall, each one a soft knock. He flipped to the next page and continued. When I opened that envelope, I didn't expect to feel anything. I thought maybe it would be another moment where people assume I'm gracious or humble just because I stay quiet. But when I saw the locket, and when I read your final words, something inside me cracked open. Not in a bad way, not in a painful way, but in a way that made space for air, for light. You gave me something I've never really let myself receive. Grace. He set the pen down for a moment, rubbing his eyes. The room was dim except for the soft glow of the lamp near the window. The night outside stayed still. Then he picked the pen up again. I think I've spent so long being looked at, I forgot how to let someone really see me. But you did. Not through headlines, not through roles. You saw me in the moments that didn't make the news. When I gave up a seat. When I held a stranger's hand. When I walked away quietly. You saw not what I did, but who I tried to be. Even when I didn't know if I was doing it right. Another page turned. He didn't know how many pages he'd write tonight. He just knew he wasn't finished yet. I want to tell you something now that I couldn't before. Thank you, Sarah. Not just for the locket, not just for the words, but for believing in me when I didn't know how to believe in myself. He paused, letting the ink dry across the page. I've met people who smiled for cameras and said kind things. I've met people who cried on red carpets and disappeared when the lights were gone. But your words, your belief, it stayed. It stayed through illness, through pain, through endings I'll never fully understand. Keanu stared at the locket beside him. The heart-shaped silver caught the soft light of the lamp. He picked it up gently and held it in the center of his palm. You didn't ask for anything, not recognition, not reply. You just gave. That kind of love. He stopped. The word love lingered on the page, unadorned and unforced. Then he continued, that kind of love changes people. I used to think that to make a difference you had to do something big. Build schools, save lives, give speeches. But tonight I realized that a letter, just one letter, can hold more light than 100 spotlights. You made me feel human again. You made me feel small in the best way, like someone with room left to grow. He turned to the next page. His words slowed now, more reflective. You reminded me of someone I once loved. Her name was Ela. I lost her when I was 17. Car crash. No goodbyes, just gone. I buried that grief in silence. I let it harden into something quiet, unreachable. But then came your words. Not loud, not demanding, just faithful. And somehow, through you, I heard her again. I saw the girl who once made me laugh when the world didn't. I remembered what it felt like to be seen, not because of who I might become, but because of who I was, even back then. So I'm writing this letter now not to say goodbye. I don't think I ever could. I'm writing because you started a conversation I want to continue." He glanced at the stack of letters she had sent over the years, neatly bundled with a silk ribbon. He reached for them and placed them beside his journal. Then he wrote, "Tomorrow, I'll reread all your letters, from the beginning, slowly, patiently. Maybe I'll write more after each one. Maybe I'll write until there's nothing left unsaid. But tonight, I just want to say I hear you. I see you." He underlined those words carefully. And maybe that's what all of this is about, being seen. He signed his name quietly at the bottom. "With all my gratitude, Keanu." He closed the journal gently, placing the pen atop it like a seal. Then he turned off the lamp and let the room return to its natural silence. But the silence wasn't empty. It was full of something sacred, something honest, something still. He sat in the quiet for a long time, the journal beside him, the locket in his palm, and the stars outside blinking in rhythm with the soft rise and fall of his breath. For the first time in years, Keanu Reeves didn't feel like a symbol. He felt like a man, writing his first letter back. The sky was pale gray as Keanu stepped out of the car and looked up at the old brick building that housed Sarah's high school. There was nothing grand or glossy about it, just the quiet simplicity of a place that had held years of youthful dreaming. He walked through the front entrance, where a small banner fluttered slightly above the doorway. It read, "Dedication Ceremony, the Sarah Avery Writing Library." Inside, a soft hush had fallen over the halls. Teachers stood beside former classmates. A few current students gathered in clusters, whispering, some holding notebooks close to their chests. At the center of the building, the newly constructed writing library had been set up in what used to be an unused study room, now transformed into something intimate and sacred. Keanu stepped in and paused. The room was flooded with natural light from wide windows on either side. Long wooden tables were arranged with stacks of blank journals, arranged by color and texture. Pens rested in mason jars. Walls were painted in calm, warm tones. In one corner stood a shelf with copies of Sarah's essays, poetry, and even some of her hand-drawn illustrations, framed in modest black frames. But what caught Keanu's eye first was the large sign hanging from the ceiling in the center of the room. It read, "Write Anyway." Beneath the words, a smaller plaque bore a quote from Sarah's final letter. "Even when you think no one is listening, write anyway. Even when your voice shakes, write anyway. Especially then." Keanu felt something tighten in his chest. He walked to the main table. There, a simple book display held a single journal. His. He had placed it there the night before, open to the letter he had written Sarah. No title, no name on the cover. Just a man's heart, poured onto paper. A small crowd stood behind him in silence as he approached the journal again. He didn't say anything. He just touched the page, gently, as if to make sure it was still real. Then, slowly, he stepped back and sat on one of the benches near the wall. The room remained silent for several long moments. Then, a girl, no older than 16, walked toward the table. She wore thick glasses and clutched a worn spiral notebook to her chest. After hesitating, she opened one of the blank journals laid out for visitors. She sat down and began to write. Another student followed, then another. Within minutes, the room transformed, not into a place of mourning, but of creation. Pens scratched softly across pages. Tears were wiped without embarrassment. Words flowed. No one spoke above a whisper. No one tried to impress. They simply wrote. One boy stood near the quote on the wall and whispered to himself before beginning. "Write anyway." A teacher watched with tears in her eyes as a student who had once struggled with stuttering scribbled furiously into a leather-bound notebook, her fingers moving faster than her breath. In the corner, someone had placed a bowl labeled "Letters to the Lost." Students were folding pages, slipping them inside, messages they might never send but needed to release. Keanu watched it all unfold without moving. It was not a tribute made of marble or metal. It was not loud. He was still. It was living. Later, a woman in her mid-50s approached Keanu quietly. She wore a staff badge and had kind eyes with lines that hinted at a life of listening. "I'm Sarah's old English teacher," she said softly. "She used to sit right there in the corner, always writing, always watching. She told me once, 'I want to write things that make someone cry and then smile without knowing why.' I think she would have smiled today." Keanu nodded, eyes misted. "She did. And she made the rest of us do the same." The teacher handed him a slim envelope. "She left one more thing, said it wasn't for press, just for this room, just for today." Inside the envelope was a handwritten page, different from her other letters. At the top, it read, "To the ones who stay silent but never stop seeing." The words that followed were raw, unpolished. It was as if Sarah had written it knowing that one day people who had never met her would find comfort in her voice. Keanu read it to himself. "I used to think you had to shout to be heard, but then I watched someone who didn't. Someone who helped people in quiet ways. A man who gave without asking, who stood when no one looked, who smiled like his heart had lived through storms. I wanted to be like that. I wanted my words to hold people like that. So if you're in this room, writing, thank you. You're holding me, and you're holding someone else too. Someone who's still trying to be brave. We don't need to be perfect. We just need to be honest, to be still, to write anyway." Keanu folded the letter gently and placed it on the front table beneath the plaque. Outside the window, light rain began to fall, but it wasn't cold. It was soft and shimmering, like a blessing. One by one, students stood and pinned their own writing to the wall. Pieces about grief, hope, friendship, and things they'd never told anyone. The room began to resemble not just a library, but a sanctuary of voices. Before he left, Keanu walked to the far end of the room, where a small wooden shelf held Sarah's favorite books. Tucked between poetry and essays was a worn copy of The Little Prince, with Sarah's name inside the front cover. He touched the spine. Then, on impulse, he opened a blank journal and began writing. "To the next person who needs to be seen. You matter. Even if no one says it yet. Especially if no one says it yet. Signed, a man still learning how to listen." He closed the journal, left it on the table, and stepped out into the light drizzle. A few students followed him to the hallway. One of them, the girl with the glasses, stopped just short of speaking. Keanu turned gently toward her. "You're the reason I write now," she said. "Not because I think I'm great, but because I know I'm not alone." He smiled. "Neither am I." And with that, he exited the school, the sound of pens still moving behind him, like soft echoes that would keep ringing long after he was gone. They didn't need a statue of Sarah. They had her voice, and now they had their own. A week after the dedication, Keanu found himself walking through a quiet part of downtown Los Angeles, the kind of neighborhood where bookstores still had handwritten signs and small bells above their doors. He wasn't there for an interview or an event. He wasn't recognized right away, which was exactly how he preferred it. Outside a narrow corner bookstore, he noticed a teenager sitting alone on the sidewalk bench, his backpack on the ground, and his eyes staring at nothing in particular. There was something about the boy's stillness, the way his shoulders sank beneath an invisible weight, that pulled Keanu's attention. He almost walked past, but something inside him paused. So he stepped over quietly, sat on the opposite end of the bench, and waited a moment before speaking. "You okay?" The boy didn't answer at first, just wiped his nose on his sleeve and kept looking at the sidewalk. Keanu didn't press. Eventually, the boy spoke. "My brother died 3 days ago," he said, barely audible. They said it was peaceful, but it didn't feel peaceful. Not to me. Keanu nodded slowly. Loss never feels the way they say it will. It doesn't follow scripts. The boy turned his head slightly, as if registering for the first time who was speaking to him. His eyes widened for a moment, but he didn't say Keanu's name. Instead, he asked, "Did you lose someone?" Keanu looked down at his hands. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I've lost a lot of someones." There was a silence between them then. Not awkward, just full. The kind of silence that feels like breathing in between words you're not ready to say. The boy finally muttered, "I can't stop seeing him, like he's going to walk in any second, and then I remember." Keanu nodded again, slowly. That remembering, it doesn't mean you're broken. It means he mattered. He reached into the pocket of his jacket, pulled out something small, wrapped in soft cloth. He unwrapped it carefully and held it out in the center of his palm. It was a replica of Sarah's heart-shaped locket. Same smooth curve, same engraved word on the back. "Still, this isn't magic," Keanu said, voice calm and clear. "It won't take the pain away, but it helped me. Maybe it'll help you too." The boy looked at it for a long time. He didn't take it right away. He just stared, blinking hard, as if the weight of this tiny thing was too much to process. Finally, slowly, he reached out and cupped it in both hands. His fingers closed around it like it was made of glass and starlight. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. Keanu stood to leave, but the boy looked up one more time. "Did someone give this to you when you were hurting?" he asked. Keanu gave the smallest smile. "Someone did, and someone gave it to her before that, I think. We're supposed to keep passing it on?" The boy held the locket against his chest. "Does it stop hurting?" he whispered. "No," Keanu replied gently. "But eventually, the love gets louder than the pain." The boy looked down at the locket again, rubbing his thumb over the engraved word on the back. Still, just one word, and yet it held so much. He didn't say anything more, but his body softened just slightly, the kind of shift that happens when someone lets in the tiniest breath of hope. Keanu stood beside him a moment longer before stepping toward the bookstore door. He paused, then turned back. "Do you read?" he asked gently. The boy shrugged. "Sometimes." "Come on in," Keanu said, nodding toward the shop. "Let me buy you a book, one that helped me when I didn't know what to say." The boy hesitated, then picked up his backpack and followed. Inside, the bookstore smelled of old paper and cedar shelves. The air was still, quiet, lined with thousands of thoughts waiting to be heard. Keanu led him to a back corner where a shelf stood labeled Letters and Light. It held collections of poems, letters from soldiers, quotes from unknown authors, books people passed on, not because they were famous, but because they were true. He pulled out a thin volume with a faded blue cover, The Way Through Words. "I read this the night my sister was in the hospital," Keanu said. "I didn't know what I needed, but one line stayed with me. We do not heal by forgetting. We heal by remembering in safe hands." He handed it to the boy. The boy cradled the book like something living. He said nothing, just nodded. At the register, Keanu paid without saying a word. The cashier smiled as she recognized him, but she didn't speak either. Somehow, everyone understood that this moment wasn't about celebrity. It was about something older, deeper. Outside, the rain had stopped. The street was washed clean, the pavement gleaming under a soft, gray sky. The boy turned to him one last time. "What was her name?" he asked. Keanu looked up at the clouds, his voice barely a whisper. "Sarah." The boy nodded. "Tell her, thank you, wherever she is." Keanu smiled. "I think she heard you." Then he walked away, hands in his jacket pockets, shoulders loose, not in a hurry to be anywhere. A few blocks down, he paused beside a flower stand and bought a single white lily. He didn't have a plan for it, just held it gently and continued walking. Later that evening, he passed the old library where he'd spoken just days before. The lights inside were still glowing. The window displayed a new handwritten sign. "Write the words someone needs to hear." He smiled faintly, pressed the white lily between the metal bars of the gate, and kept walking. Back at home, he opened the drawer where he kept a few keepsakes. Things that weren't trophies or awards. Just meaning. He placed the boy's locket there, knowing it would leave his hands again someday. Because grief, like love, wasn't something to hoard. It was something to carry together. And passing the light, no matter how quietly, was what made the world bearable. The ballroom shimmered with soft light, not the kind designed for celebrity entrances or red carpet glamour, but the kind that made everything feel warm and human. It was the annual gala for pediatric cancer research, a night filled with intention rather than spectacle. The chairs were simple, the stage was plain. What mattered wasn't the decorations, it was the stories. Keanu Reeves stood off to the side, not backstage, just quietly near the exit, holding a small index card he hadn't written anything on. He'd been invited to speak weeks earlier. Everyone expected a prepared speech, something heartwarming, maybe even rehearsed. But Keanu hadn't written a word. He didn't want to give a performance. He wanted to give a memory. When the host called his name, there was no burst of applause, just a hush, like the room instinctively knew that something different was about to happen. He walked to the microphone slowly, wearing a simple black suit. Around his neck, resting visibly above his chest, was the locket. Sarah's locket. Its silver surface glinted under the warm light, the word "still" quietly catching the eyes of those in the front rows. Keanu looked out over the audience. Doctors, parents, researchers, children. Some wore tuxedos. Some wore hospital bracelets. He took a deep breath. "I was asked to speak tonight because I've played heroes," he began, his voice soft. "Because I've been in movies where people overcome impossible odds. But tonight, I'm not here because of a film. I'm here because of a girl named Sarah." He paused. The room leaned in. "She was 23, he continued. She battled cancer longer than she had the chance to be an adult. She never asked to meet me. She never demanded anything. She just sent letters." He reached into his inside pocket and pulled out one of the folded pages. His fingers trembled slightly, but he held steady. "In one of her notes," he said, she wrote, "You don't have to answer. I just want you to know that when I'm too tired to fight, I watch the way you walk through the world, and it makes me believe kindness still counts." He looked up, his eyes shining. No tears yet, just presence. "I didn't answer her letters," he said, "not because I didn't care, but because I didn't think I deserved them. I thought she mistook me for someone better than I am." Silence. He touched the locket gently. This was hers. Sarah asked that it be sent to me after she passed. Inside are some of her ashes. She said she didn't want flowers or a stone or a plaque. She said, "I just want to be close to him." The entire room stilled. Even the clink of silverware had stopped. The weight of his words moved across the audience like a wave held in suspension. Keanu looked at the back of the locket and traced the engraving with his thumb. "He says, 'still,'" he said. She chose that word. Another pause. "I think she meant stillness in the face of fear, stillness when there's no cure, stillness when everything hurts and yet you still choose to love. Stillness is not giving up, it's standing quietly when the world expects you to fall apart." Keanu took a slow breath and looked out across the crowd. His voice remained low, but steady. "She reminded me that being seen isn't always about fame," he said. "It's about being known, even in silence, especially in silence." He let that linger before continuing. "I spent years believing that I had to earn my place in this world, that I had to prove I deserved to be cared for. Sarah, in her letters, never once asked me to prove anything. She just gave. She gave her thoughts, her kindness, her grace. He held up the letter again, unfolded now. This is her final note. It reads, "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. But it also means I trusted the world to carry my love to you." He paused, gently lowering the paper. That's not just about me, that's about all of us. Everyone in this room, everyone who gives, listens, waits. Everyone who believes that kindness, even if it comes late, still matters. A single tear traced the corner of his eye, but he didn't wipe it away. She didn't save my life, but she gave me something I didn't know I'd lost. She gave me permission to be human again, to feel without needing a script, to grieve without apology, to remember without fear. He stepped slightly away from the microphone, the silence around him thick, reverent. "This locket," he said, holding it gently between his fingers, "isn't just a symbol of loss. It's a reminder that we carry people, in gestures, in choices, in pauses between words. You don't need to be famous to carry someone's light. You just need to be willing." A few heads in the audience bowed. "No spotlight," he added, "no award, just presence and love." His voice cracked on the last word. He didn't try to recover it. He stepped back, not dramatically, just enough to signal he was finished. No applause followed, no standing ovation, just silence. The kind of silence that holds everything sacred, that says, "We heard you, we felt it, we will remember." In that stillness, a few children in the audience looked up at their parents. A few parents looked down at the hospital bands on their own wrists. And somewhere near the back, a nurse quietly touched the name badge she'd pinned over her heart. Sarah's room. Pediatric oncology. Keanu returned to his table slowly, no music playing, no words exchanged. The host didn't try to resume the schedule. They didn't move on to the next speaker. They let the moment breathe. Later that night, after the gala ended, a small group of attendees stayed behind. They stood near the edge of the ballroom, some lighting candles, some just hugging one another. One mother walked up to Keanu and pressed a folded note into his hand. "Team wrote one to you too," the woman whispered. "My daughter. Her name was Eliza. She watched Sarah's video, said it made her feel less afraid." Keanu clutched the note without opening it. He simply whispered, "Thank you." When he finally stepped outside, the air was cool and quiet. He walked alone, the locket still around his neck, Sarah's last words echoing not just in his ears, but somewhere deeper. And for the first time in years, the man known for silence felt understood, not as a star, but as a soul still learning how to carry the light. The apartment was quiet. No television, no music. Just the soft tick of a vintage clock on the far wall, barely audible. Keanu stood barefoot by the window, the city beyond him glowing in soft amber hues, the kind of light that didn't demand attention but offered comfort, like a memory that never left. On the shelf in front of him sat the painting Sarah had made, the one with the man in the rain, golden light radiating from his chest. And now, beside it, another canvas. It was smaller, simpler, but it said something no words could. A second figure stood beside the man in the rain. She wasn't touching him, not reaching out, just there, a girl-shaped silhouette, head tilted upward, not in worship, but in witness. Someone who didn't need to speak to understand. Someone who had chosen to stand with him in the downpour. Keanu stared at it for a long time. His lips moved slightly, as if rehearsing something. Then, with a gentle breath, he whispered aloud, "It's not about being the light." He paused. "It's about being close enough that someone else remembers theirs." He let that thought linger in the space between him and the canvas, as though the walls themselves needed to hear it too. Turning slowly, Keanu crossed to his writing desk, the same place where, weeks earlier, he'd begun his journal to Sarah. The leather-bound notebook still lay there, pages full, but closed now. Not finished, but honored. Beside it rested a new one. Still blank, still waiting. He sat down quietly and ran his hand over the smooth cover. Then, in silence, he opened it. He didn't reach for profound words, didn't plan his thoughts. He simply began. "Dear Sarah," he wrote, "I used to think silence meant forgetting, but I think now it means remembering without fear." He wrote slowly, each sentence like a step across familiar ground. With every line, the room felt fuller, as if someone else were there beside him, not watching, just being. He paused after a few paragraphs and stared out the window again. "I'm still here," he said softly. 3 words. Simple, undramatic, but heavy with meaning. Because he was still here, still choosing to carry kindness, still choosing to answer, even if the letter came after goodbye. He closed the journal for the night, but left it open just enough for air to touch the page. As if words, like grief, needed room to breathe. Then he stood once more before Sarah's painting, before the new one beside it. He didn't say anything else. He just placed his hand gently over his chest, where the locket still rested. Outside, the night continued quietly, unaware that something small, but sacred, had shifted. Later that night, Keanu stood by the kitchen sink pouring a glass of water. His movements were slow, intentional, the kind of quiet a person earns after going through something that changed them. He leaned on the counter, thinking about the weight of grief and how it can shift over time, from something that crushes to something that anchors. He turned the lights off and walked back toward the living room, the soft locket still resting against his chest. On the wall near the door, there was now a small framed note. Not Sarah's handwriting, but his. Just 4 words. "Keep passing it on." It wasn't meant for guests. It was for him. A reminder every time he walked out into the world that light doesn't fade when shared. It multiplies. The night was cool. He opened a window and let the breeze carry through. For a few moments he just stood there, eyes closed, listening to the wind whisper against the curtains. In the quiet, he remembered Sarah's voice in the video. "You didn't save me by doing, you saved me by being." He hadn't needed to be a hero, he just needed to be real. And that's what Sarah had seen all along. Not the actor, not the public figure, but the man behind it all. The one who had known loss, the one who still wrestled with silence, the one who had never truly believed his presence could matter. But it had. And now he wanted others to know theirs did too. Keanu walked over to the journal again, flipped to the last page, and wrote a single line across it. Sometimes, the smallest kindness changes someone's entire direction. He capped the pen, closed the book gently, and let his fingers rest on its cover. Then, with a steady voice and a quiet heart, he turned to the camera that had been silently recording this moment, set up not for fame, but for connection. "If you're watching this," he said, "I hope you remember that you matter. You don't have to say the perfect thing or do the biggest gesture. You just have to show up. Just once, with sincerity." He stepped closer. If Sarah's story touched you in any way, if you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or like your quiet grief didn't matter, I see you, and I believe in you. He gave a small nod, then added one final thought. If you've ever carried someone's memory quietly, in the way you walk through the world, this story is yours too. Then came the soft invitation. If this story moved you, leave a 9 in the comments, not for numbers, but for what it means to remember. He looked down at the locket once more. Then, one last whisper. And if you've ever offered someone kindness when no one was looking, I hope you share that below. Let others see how many lights are still burning. The screen faded slowly to black, but the feeling lingered. Because some stories don't end. They echo quietly, gently, powerfully. And sometimes the echo sounds a lot like love.